Sword of Atlas is a tactical role-playing game where the players take control of a party of travelers pitted against AI opponents, where fast-paced decision-making meets grid-based combat in a world where your actions determine the fate of your party. That's a lot of words to say. We are taking a turn meter action system, putting it on a grid, and playing it out in real time. Welcome back, everybody. This week, we're talking to the engineers on Sword of Atlas. These three, as well as Patrick, who wasn't able to join us today, have been working pretty intensively the last handful of months, putting together the back end for all of our game. So maybe we'll have you all introduce yourself. We'll start with Nate.
So I'm Nate Strohmyer, and I'm pretty much responsible for like the grid system that drives our game, drives combat and movement. And then I also am responsible for the tile effects. So kind of like when you step on a trap or stuff like that.
I'm Jonah Brooks. I primarily work on the systems end of engineering. So things like experience gain, leveling up, how the stats influence the damage dealt and received, and things like that.
Hi, I'm Theo Grant. I'm kind of a generalist engineer for this project. I've worked on a lot of different systems, from the AI to whatever the grid, whatever these two need help with when they're working on stuff. Some of the bigger systems that I've worked on have been the dialogue system and targeting for all the characters and skills.
So maybe just talking a little bit about the early prototyping, setting up the grid, because we knew we were using a grid and that was going to be the system we'd use. So did you know you wanted to build it from scratch? Did you look at some tools to use? What was that early process like?
I was mainly responsible for even building the grid and like the prototype and everything. Honestly, there's just isn't much. I never saw many tools for it that didn't just cost like a couple $100 or something on the Unreal store, especially for that prototype. It was definitely just build something that can get a grid system working quickly in Unreal. We knew we wanted to do like a 2D with like in like a 3D environment. Building a grid system kind of for that was a lot more challenging.
Was there a lot of discussion about which engine to use? I think most of us are more familiar with Unreal, so we kind of default to that. But did you think about using Unity at any point?
Yeah, for a while. In the very beginning, we were debating whether we wanted to use Unity or Unreal. I think if we would have decided that we were going to do fully 2D game, we were definitely going to do Unity because they have a lot of tools for that. They even have a kind of a grid system by default in Unity. But we just, once we kind of decided we want to do that like 3D-esque environment, people wanted to do Unreal just because artists were more familiar with it. Us as engineers were generally more familiar with it and everything. So in the end, we decided to go with that.
It's a little bit more accessible, I feel like, too, with the blueprinting. So the designers and the producers can be a little bit more involved.
Yeah, I guess that kind of worked out great because like half of our 8 to 10 producer team or whatever,
Yeah.
We have half people actually working in blueprints in some capacity. So it kind of worked out. I feel like once we were so pressed to get the prototype done in like the 2 weeks or whatever we had, we thought about it for like a day and then we just gotta go.
Yeah.
And we just kind of picked up Unreal and just didn't really look back.
There was very few RPG systems in the game until probably fairly recently. Definitely, I think after you joined, Jonah, right? So Nate and Theo, was there any RPG work early on, or was it all grid?
The only thing in the prototype was the grid, moving around on the grid, and then like getting that ATB timer, kind of like getting that kind of flow of movement, and that was like a big part of it. It wasn't even really like any attacks or skills or stats, none of that. It was just those basic,
just health and speed, I think, was the only thing we had functional.
Jonah, what do we have now? Do you even remember offhand how many stats we have?
We have a lot of stats now. It fluctuates by the week, by the design of, do we want to be able to do critical hits? Do we want to be managing mana? Do we want to? So the stats structure is fairly large and has a bunch of stats that we may or may not even use in the final game, but it's expanded considerably from speed and health.
What has been the most challenging part for you, or what have you had to learn the most about before kind of getting going on this project?
I guess there's 2 answers to that. Line of sight can be a real pain. And it's not something that I ever thought was going to take me as long as it did. That was like many hours of trying like 3 different pretty well-established strategies for line of sight in a grid area. That was really annoying. The more general thing, I think, is any RPG system when you put a stat system in progression, like balancing that and just having it make any kind of sense and making units feel more unique and like actually getting that feel in an RPG is really, really hard.
I think the thing I learned the most about is probably persistence between different levels, different maps, trying to get everything to sync up so that it's one cohesive playthrough as you go. That was all new to me when I started researching those things.
I think one of the harder things was just trying to get a way to have like the grid system store and like be just effective to use for other people. Because like I have to end up storing all of this extra information per tile, and just finding a good way to do that and like an efficient way to do that. Even just showing that many grid things, just managing all that turns into a pain when you quickly get like 2,000 tiles.
Speaking for kind of all the engineers here, I think we did a pretty good job going from the early stages, at least from when I joined the team, of setting things up so that the producers and designers can get in and tweak things. Designers come up with a skill they'd like to implement, and then they generally go into blueprinting and start working through it, and then hit up the engineers if there's any technical details that they're running into.
And that's mostly because you all have set up the tools to allow that to happen, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
for the most part.
Especially shout out to Pat for really getting the skill system like frameworked and like get that all set up in C++ and designed in a way that's it's fairly intuitive. For once like somebody shows you how to do it the one time, it's really easy to make a bunch of different varieties of skills just by showing how to manipulate certain stats like defense, attack, and just tweaking those slightly over this nice little neat contained framework. It's been a kind of a reoccurring theme for the game as a whole.
Well, thank you all for joining. Nate, Theo, and Jonah. Appreciate you talking to us about kind of your process and how the backend is operated and kind of your thoughts going into its design. So appreciate your time.
Yeah, thanks for having us.